She thought love meant sacrifice until it left her broken on a hotel floor. Betrayed by the man she built up, humiliated in a foreign land, Stephanie never imagined her salvation would come wrapped in silk suits and dangerous secrets. Kim Seo offered her a marriage without love, a fortress without warmth. But when protection turns to obsession, when cold distance melts into burning devotion, she discovers the man who owns Seoul's underworld has surrendered his empire for one thing, her. Some love stories are written in roses. This one? Written in blood. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more heart-stopping romance. She pressed herself against the wall of Kim Seo's private study, her heart hammering so violently she thought it might tear through her ribcage. Through the crack in the doorway, she watched her husband, the man she'd married 3 months ago in a ceremony so quiet it felt like a funeral, press a gun against another man's temple with the same casual indifference he used when adjusting his cufflinks. "I don't repeat myself, Mr. Park," Kim Seo said, his voice silk over steel. "You borrowed money from my organization. You will return it with interest, or I will take payment in ways that will make you beg for bankruptcy." The man on his knees was sobbing now, hands clasped together like he was praying to a god who'd stopped listening years ago. "Please, please, I just need more time. My daughter's wedding." "Your daughter's wedding is not my concern." Kim Seo's finger moved to the trigger. "Your debt is." Stephanie's hand flew to her mouth, stifling the gasp that tried to escape. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be the same man who'd saved her from complete destruction, who'd offered her his name when she had nothing left, who left fresh coffee by her bedside every morning without a word. This couldn't be her husband. But it was. The crack of the gun never came. Instead, Kim Seo lowered the weapon and gestured to the men standing in the shadows, men Stephanie had assumed were bodyguards or business associates, not executioners waiting for orders. "Take him to the warehouse. Let him think about his choices overnight. If he's still stubborn in the morning, remove one finger for every $1,000,000 he owes." The men dragged Mr. Park away, his pleas fading down the corridor like ghosts. Kim Seo set the gun on his desk with a soft click, then reached for the whiskey decanter as if he'd just finished reviewing quarterly reports instead of threatening a man's life. Stephanie stumbled backward, her heel catching on the Persian rug. The sound was barely audible, but Kim Seo's head snapped toward the door with predatory precision. "Stephanie." Not a question. A statement. He always knew. She ran. Her feet carried her through the sprawling mansion, this prison of luxury she'd called home for 3 months, past priceless artwork and floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked Seoul's glittering skyline. Everything here was beautiful and cold, just like the man who owned it. Just like the man she'd married. She made it to their bedroom, her bedroom, really, since Kim Seo had never once crossed its threshold without invitation and locked the door with shaking hands. Her back hit the wall and she slid down, pressing her palms against her eyes as if she could unsee what she'd witnessed. 3 months ago, she'd been broken. Completely, utterly shattered. 3 months ago, she'd watched the man she loved, the man she'd supported through his startup's darkest days, the man she'd given everything to announce his engagement to another woman at a 5-star hotel in the heart of Seoul. She could still hear the applause, still see the flash of cameras, still feel the weight of every eye in that room when they'd recognized her standing in the doorway. The mistress. The foreigner. The fool. Jae-sung hadn't even had the decency to look ashamed. He'd smiled at her across that ballroom with the same smile he'd used when she'd wired him money to keep his company afloat, when she'd worked double shifts to pay their rent, when she'd believed his promises that they were building a future together. "It's just business, Steph," he'd told her later that night, when she'd confronted him in the hotel corridor with tears streaming down her face. "You understand business, don't you? Her father is investing $10 million. What were you going to invest? Your love." He'd laughed. Actually laughed. That laugh had killed something in her. She'd left that hotel with nothing, no money, no pride, no future. She'd wandered Seoul's streets until her feet bled, until the looks from strangers turned from curiosity to contempt. A black woman alone in a city that didn't know what to do with her, that made her feel invisible and hyper-visible all at once. She'd been ready to use the last of her savings for a plane ticket back to Chicago, back to the family who'd warned her not to follow Jae-sung to Korea, back to the life she'd abandoned for a love that never existed. Then Kim Seo had found her. No, that wasn't quite right. Kim Seo had been looking for her. She still didn't understand why. She'd met him exactly once before, at a finance conference where she'd been presenting on emerging markets, and he'd been sitting in the front row, watching her with those unreadable dark eyes. They'd spoken for maybe 5 minutes afterward, a brief conversation about currency fluctuation that she'd forgotten within days. But he hadn't forgotten her. 2 days after Jae-sung's engagement party, Kim Seo had appeared at the tiny guest house where she'd been staying, looking like he'd stepped out of a magazine spread in his tailored Tom Ford suit. The landlady had actually bowed when she'd let him in. "Miss Thompson," he'd said, his English perfect and precisely accented. "Position for you." She'd been packing, folding cheap clothes into a worn suitcase, trying not to cry again because she was so damn tired of crying. "I'm not interested in propositions from strange men. Even ones that come with 500 million won and a solution to your current predicament?" That had made her stop. 500 million won. Almost $500,000. She turned to face him, this beautiful stranger with his sharp jawline and sharper suit, and crossed her arms over her chest. "What kind of solution requires that kind of money?" "Marriage," he'd said simply. "I need a wife. You need stability and protection. It's a mutually beneficial arrangement." She'd laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "You've got to be kidding me. I never joke about business, Miss Thompson." He'd set a folder on her bed, thick with papers. 1-year contract. "You'll live in my home, attend events as needed, and maintain the appearance of a devoted wife. In return, you'll receive the settlement I mentioned, full legal protection, and access to resources that will help you rebuild your career. After 1 year, we'll quietly divorce, and you'll be free to pursue whatever life you choose." "Why?" The question had burst out of her. "Why me? You could marry anyone. You could actually marry someone you love." Something had flickered across his face then, too quick to read, gone before she could interpret it. "Love is a liability I can't afford. You, Miss Thompson, are exactly what I need. Someone intelligent, professional, and with absolutely no illusions about what this arrangement entails." "You mean someone desperate enough to say yes?" "If you prefer that phrasing." He'd walked to the door, then paused with his hand on the handle. "I'm not offering you a fairy tale, Stephanie. I'm offering you survival. You have 24 hours to decide." She decided in 24 minutes. What choice did she have? Return to America as a failure, or stay in Korea as Kim Seo's wife, protected, provided for, and probably miserable, but at least safe from the whispers and stares and the memory of Jae-sung's cruel laugh. The wedding had been small. Just a government official, 2 witnesses she'd never met, and Kim Seo's attorney reviewing papers while she signed her name next to his. No white dress. No flowers. No pretense that this was anything other than a transaction. "You'll have your own room," Kim Seo had told her on the drive to his mansion. "Your own space. I won't intrude on your privacy unless absolutely necessary for appearances." He'd kept that promise. In 3 months of marriage, he'd been nothing but respectful. Distant, but respectful. He left for work before she woke up and returned after she'd gone to bed. They shared perhaps 3 meals a week together, conversations limited to polite inquiries about her day and whether she needed anything. She'd started to think maybe this arrangement could work. Maybe she could survive this year of playing pretend, take her settlement, and disappear into a new life somewhere far from Seoul and Jae-sung and the memories that still woke her up crying in the middle of the night. She'd started to think Kim Seo was just what he appeared to be, a wealthy businessman who needed a wife for appearance's sake, probably to appease traditional family members or business partners. She'd been so stupid. A knock on the bedroom door made her jump. "Stephanie." Kim Seo's voice was calm, controlled. It was always calm and controlled. "I know you're frightened. I need you to let me in so we can talk about what you saw." "Go away," she managed, her voice breaking. "Just go away." Silence. "Then, I'm not leaving this door until you speak with me." We can do this now, or we can do this in 6 hours when you're exhausted, and I'm still standing here. Your choice. God, she hated that about him. That certainty. That absolute confidence that he would get what he wanted, always, no matter how long it took. She stood up, her legs unsteady, and opened the door. Kim Seo filled the doorway, still in his work clothes though he'd removed his jacket. His white shirt was pristine, not a drop of blood or sign of violence anywhere on him. He looked like he should be modeling watches in a luxury magazine, not threatening to dismember people in warehouses. His eyes scanned her face, cataloging every tear track, every tremor. May I come in? She stepped back wordlessly. What was the point of saying no? This was his house, his prison, his kingdom. She was just living in it. He entered slowly, hands visible and empty, like he was approaching a wounded animal. Maybe that's what she was. Maybe that's all she'd ever been, something wounded that he'd picked up off the street and decided to keep. Sit down, he said gently. Please. She sat on the edge of the bed, as far from him as the room allowed. He remained standing by the window, giving her space, his silhouette dark against Seoul's glowing lights. What you saw tonight, he began, choosing each word with surgical precision, was a part of my life that I intended to keep separate from you for as long as possible. You're a criminal. Her voice sounded hollow even to her own ears. You're not a businessman. You're Mafia or Yakuza or whatever they call it here. I'm both. He turned to face her, his expression unreadable. The Kim Corporation is entirely legitimate. Real estate, technology investments, international trade, all legal, all profitable. But I also run an organization that operates in spaces where the law is less relevant. Money lending, information brokerage, protection services. Sometimes those services require force. Force. She laughed, the sound edged with hysteria. You were going to cut off that man's fingers. I wasn't going to do anything. My people would have handled it, and Mr. Park knows this. He borrowed 20 million 6 months ago and has made exactly one payment. He's had every opportunity to negotiate, to set up a plan, to be honest about his situation. Instead, he bought his daughter a wedding that cost more than his debt and assumed I wouldn't notice. Kim Seo's jaw tightened. I don't tolerate theft, Stephanie. And I don't make empty threats. She stared at him, this stranger she'd married, this man she'd lived beside for 3 months without knowing at all. You should have told me. Would you have married me if I had? The question hung between them like a blade. No, she wouldn't have. She'd been desperate, yes, but not desperate enough to tie herself to a criminal. Not desperate enough to become complicit in violence and extortion and whatever else Kim Seo's organization did in the shadows of Seoul's glittering nightlife. That's what I thought, he said softly when she didn't answer. And I needed you to say yes, Stephanie. I needed you specifically. Why? She stood up, anger finally cutting through the fear. You never explained why me. Why some broke, heartbroken black woman you met once at a conference? You could have any wife you wanted. I wanted you. The words stopped her cold. Kim Seo took a step closer, then another, closing the distance between them with the careful deliberation of a man who knew exactly how much space to leave for escape. I've been watching you since that conference, Stephanie. I've seen how you handle pressure, how you think through problems, how you refuse to compromise your integrity even when it costs you. I've read every article you've published, watched every presentation you've given. You're brilliant and resilient, and exactly the kind of woman who could survive in my world. I don't want to survive in your world, she whispered. I know. But you're here anyway, and now you know the truth about who I am. He stopped just close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his dark eyes, close enough to count his heartbeats if she tried. So we have a choice to make. You can leave tonight. I'll honor the contract, you'll get your settlement, your freedom, everything I promised. Or you can stay, knowing everything now, and let me protect you the way I've been protecting you since the moment you said yes. Protect me from what? His expression darkened. From the people who would hurt you to hurt me. From the rivals who would see an American wife as a weakness to exploit. From your ex-boyfriend who's been making inquiries about you through channels he thinks are discreet but aren't. Ice slid down her spine. Jason? He's been asking questions. Where you're living, who you're with. Whether you're still in Korea. His new fiancé's father pulled some of his investment last month, a coincidence that has nothing to do with me, despite what Jae-sung seems to believe, and now he's looking for alternatives. I suspect he thinks reconciling with you might open doors. Stephanie felt sick. I don't want anything to do with him. I know. That's why his inquiries have been met with silence and subtle suggestions that pursuing this line of questioning would be unwise. Kim Seo's voice dropped lower, more dangerous. I've been protecting you, Stephanie. Not because our contract requires it, but because the thought of anyone hurting you makes me want to burn this entire city down. She couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. This was too much. The violence, the revelations, the way he was looking at her like she was something precious instead of a business arrangement. I don't understand, she managed. This was supposed to be fake. Just paperwork and appearances and... It was, he interrupted. Until it wasn't. What's that supposed to mean? Kim Seo reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb. The gesture was so gentle it made her want to cry harder. It means, he said quietly, that somewhere between the wedding and now, between the silent breakfasts and the stolen glances when you thought I wasn't looking, I made the mistake of falling in love with my wife. The world tilted. Stephanie grabbed the bedpost for balance, staring at this man, this dangerous, powerful, impossible man, who just confessed love like it was a tactical error instead of a miracle. You can't, she said, even though her heart was trying to beat its way out of her chest. This was a contract. You said love was a liability. It is. His hand dropped back to his side, and she hated how much she missed his touch already. The worst liability I've ever taken on. Loving you makes me vulnerable, makes me irrational, makes me weak in ways that could destroy everything I've built. Do you know what I did to your ex-boyfriend after his engagement party? She shook her head mutely. I had my people pull every investor contact, every business connection, every opportunity he had lined up. I made sure every door he tried to open closed in his face. I ruined him, Stephanie, not because it served my interests, but because he hurt you and I couldn't stand the thought of him breathing the same air without consequences. Kim Seo's voice was raw now, stripped of its usual control. That's not business. That's not strategy. That's revenge born from watching you cry yourself to sleep every night for 2 weeks and being powerless to fix what he broke. You could hear me? The question came out small and mortified. These walls aren't as thick as you think. And I've spent more nights standing outside your door than I care to admit, fighting the urge to come in and hold you until the pain stopped. He laughed bitterly. You want to know the real reason I married you, Stephanie? The truth I couldn't admit even to myself. Yes, she whispered. Because the moment I saw you present at that conference, I knew you were going to ruin me. I knew if I didn't find a way to keep you close, I'd spend the rest of my life wondering what could have been. And when I heard about your situation with Jae-sung, when I saw an opportunity to help you and bind you to me at the same time, I took it. I'm not a good man, Stephanie. Good men don't run organizations like mine. But I'm your husband, and I will protect you with everything I have, even if that means protecting you from the truth of what I am. Stephanie's mind was reeling. 3 months. She'd spent 3 months living with a man who was in love with her and hadn't said a word. A man who'd listened to her cry and hadn't offered comfort because he'd promised her space. A man who'd destroyed her ex-boyfriend's life as a wedding gift. I need time, she said finally. I need time to think about this. About all of it. Kim Seo nodded once, sharp and controlled, the businessman sliding back over the man who'd just confessed his heart. Take all the time you need. But Stephanie, he paused at the door, his hand on the frame. Whatever you decide, know this. You are not trapped here. You were never trapped. The moment you want to leave, you can walk out that door, and I'll make sure you have everything you need to build the life you deserve. But if you choose to stay knowing what I am and what loving me means, I will spend every day proving that you made the right choice. Then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. Stephanie stood in the silence of her bedroom, her safe space in this mansion of secrets, and tried to remember how to breathe. Nothing about this was what she'd signed up for. She'd wanted safety, stability, and a year to heal before facing the world again. She hadn't wanted violence or danger or a husband who could threaten a man's life one moment and confess, love the next. She definitely hadn't wanted to feel her own heart responding to that confession, hadn't wanted the treacherous warmth spreading through her chest at the memory of his touch, his words, his absolute certainty that she was worth burning cities for. This was insane. This was dangerous. This was the most wanted she'd felt in her entire life. Stephanie walked to her window and looked out at Seoul, the city that had broken her, the city where she'd lost everything, the city where Kim Seo had found her and offered her a devil's bargain that was starting to feel more like salvation than she'd ever admit out loud. Somewhere in this glittering sprawl, Jae-sung was sleeping next to his investor's daughter, probably dreaming about the business deals that mattered more than the woman he'd destroyed. Somewhere in these towers of glass and steel, people were making money and breaking hearts and living ordinary lives that would never intersect with the world Kim Seo inhabited. And somewhere in this mansion, her husband was probably pouring himself another whiskey and wondering if he'd just ruined everything by telling the truth. She should leave. She should take the settlement and run as far from Kim Seo and his dangerous love as possible. But she didn't move toward her suitcase. Didn't start packing. Didn't do anything except press her palm against the cold glass and whisper to her reflection. What am I going to do? The city didn't answer. It never did. The next morning, Stephanie woke to find a single white rose on her breakfast tray. There was no note, no explanation, just the rose lying next to her coffee and croissant like it had every right to be there. She picked it up carefully, checking for thorns. Kim Seo would absolutely give her a rose with the thorns intact as some kind of metaphor, but it had been stripped clean. Safe. He'd made it safe for her. She was still holding it when Mrs. Han, the housekeeper, came in to collect the tray. Mr. Kim left early this morning, Mrs. Han said in her careful English, her eyes knowing. He said he won't be back until late. He also said you should use his car and driver if you need to go anywhere. Mr. Park will take you wherever you wish. Stephanie nodded, not trusting her voice. Mrs. Han had worked for Kim Seo for years. She had to know what he really did, had to know about the violence and the threats and the warehouse, where Mr. Park was probably waking up minus a few fingers. Did that make Mrs. Han complicit? Did living in this house, eating this food, wearing clothes bought with money that came from God knows where make Stephanie complicit too? Mrs. Han, she said quietly, how long have you worked for Kim Seo? The older woman paused, considering the question carefully. 15 years, Mrs. Kim. Since he was 23 years old and just starting to build his empire. And in all that time, has he ever been married before? No, ma'am. You are the first and only Mrs. Kim. Something softened in Mrs. Han's expression. He's a complicated man, our Mr. Kim. Dangerous, yes. But not cruel. Not to those who are loyal to him, and never to those he loves. He told you. It wasn't a question. Mrs. Han smiled. He didn't have to, ma'am. I've seen him look at you when you're not watching. I've seen him come home from business meetings and go straight to your door to make sure you're safe and sleeping. A man doesn't do those things for a contract wife. She left before Stephanie could respond, taking the breakfast tray and leaving the rose behind. Stephanie spent the day wandering the mansion, seeing it with new eyes now that she knew what it really was, not just a home, but a fortress. She noticed the security cameras hidden in corners, the guards positioned at every entrance, the way certain doors were always locked and certain hallways were clearly off limits. She found Kim Seo's home office unlocked and stood in the doorway for a long moment before entering. It was exactly like him, impeccable, organized, revealing nothing. Leather-bound books lined the walls, all in Korean or English, mostly business and philosophy and art history. His desk was clear except for a single photo frame turned face down. She shouldn't look. It was an invasion of privacy, a crossing of boundaries that Kim Seo had meticulously maintained despite his confession last night. She looked anyway. The photo was old, the colors slightly faded. It showed a younger Kim Seo, maybe 16 or 17, standing between two adults who must have been his parents. His father had the same sharp jawline, the same controlled expression. His mother was beautiful, delicate, smiling at the camera with warmth that looked almost foreign in this house of cold marble and colder rules. They were all dead now. She'd found that out from a basic internet search back when she was researching Kim Seo before the wedding. His parents had died in a car accident when he was 18, leaving him as the sole heir to the Kim fortune and, apparently, the Kim organization. She set the photo back carefully, face down like she'd found it, and left the office with more questions than answers. By evening, she'd made a decision. She was still sitting in the living room, the rose in a vase beside her, when Kim Seo came home just after midnight. He stopped in the doorway when he saw her, clearly not expecting her to be waiting up. "Stephanie." He was still in his suit, though his tie was loosened, and there was a tightness around his eyes that spoke of a long, difficult day. "Is everything all right?" "I want to renegotiate our contract," she said. His expression shuddered immediately, that cool businessman mask sliding into place. "I see. What terms are you proposing?" "Complete honesty." She stood up, meeting his eyes directly. "I stay, but you tell me everything. No more secrets, no more protection through ignorance. If I'm going to be your wife, really your wife, not just on paper, I need to know what that means. Who you are. What you do. All of it." Kim Seo was silent for a long moment, studying her like she was a contract he was trying to find loopholes in. "If I tell you everything, you become complicit, Stephanie. If anything were to happen, if authorities ever came asking questions, your ignorance would be your protection. I don't want protection through ignorance anymore. I want the truth. The truth is ugly." "I've seen ugly before," she said quietly. "Ugly is being humiliated in front of 200 people by the man you love. Ugly is watching him laugh while you fall apart. Ugly is being so broken you accept a marriage proposal from a stranger because you literally have no other options." She took a step toward him. "Your truth might be dangerous, Kim Seo, but I'm not afraid of danger. I'm afraid of being lied to again. I'm afraid of waking up one day and realizing I married another man who thought I was too weak or too stupid or too foreign to handle his reality." Something cracked in his composure. He crossed the room in 3 strides and caught her face between his palms, his touch reverent despite the intensity in his eyes. "You are the strongest woman I have ever met," he said fiercely. "And if you want the truth, I will give it to you. All of it. But Stephanie, once you know, you can't unknow. Once you're truly part of my world, leaving becomes infinitely more complicated. Maybe I don't want to leave." His breath caught. "Don't say that unless you mean it." "I mean it." And God help her, she did. She'd spent all day trying to talk herself out of this, trying to be rational and smart and self-preserving. But the truth was, she'd felt more alive in 3 months with Kim Seo than she had in 3 years with Jae-sung. The truth was, she was tired of running from danger when danger was the only thing that had ever truly protected her. The truth was, she was falling for her husband, and no amount of logic was going to stop it. Kim Seo kissed her. It wasn't gentle or tentative or anything like a first kiss should be. It was desperate and claiming, 3 months of restraint shattering like glass. His hands slid into her hair, angling her head as he deepened the kiss, and Stephanie grabbed his jacket lapels to keep from falling, because her knees had apparently forgotten how to function. When he finally pulled back, they were both breathing hard. "Your room or mine?" he asked roughly. "Yours," she answered without hesitation. "I want to sleep in the bed where you've been sleeping while I was crying on the other side of these walls. I want to know what it feels like to be held by you instead of spending another night alone wondering if this is real." He lifted her, actually lifted her off her feet, and carried her through the mansion to his bedroom. It was the first time she'd seen his private space, and it was shockingly simple compared to the rest of the house. Just a massive bed, a few pieces of furniture, and floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked Seoul's nightscape. He set her down gently on the bed, then hesitated. "We don't have to if you just want to sleep." She pulled him down to her, answering with her mouth what she couldn't quite put into words yet. That she wanted this. Wanted him. Wanted to replace the memory of Jae-sung's betrayal with something real and fierce and wholly hers. Kim Seo understood. He always understood. He made love to her like she was precious and breakable and desperately wanted all at once, learning her body with the same intense focus he probably applied to hostile business negotiations. And when she fell apart in his arms, when he whispered her name like a prayer against her skin, Stephanie felt something inside her chest crack open. Some last defense she'd been holding onto finally giving way. Afterward, they lay tangled together in sheets that smelled like him, expensive cologne and something darker, more dangerous, and Kim Seo kept his promise. He told her everything. He told her about his father's organization, about inheriting an empire built on fear and loyalty at 18 years old. He told her about the legitimate businesses he'd built to launder money, the connections he maintained with police and politicians, the delicate balance between legal and illegal that he walked every single day. He told her about the rivals who wanted him dead, the allies who would betray him for the right price, the violence that was sometimes necessary to maintain order in a world where order only existed through force. He told her about the first man he'd killed, a rival gang member who'd murdered one of Kim Seo's people, and how he'd vomited afterward even though he'd do it again to protect his organization. He told her everything, and she listened without flinching. When he was done, when he'd laid his soul bare in the darkness of his bedroom, he waited for her judgment, her horror, her retreat. Instead, she kissed him again and said, "Thank you for trusting me." "You're not afraid?" He sounded genuinely confused. "I'm terrified," she admitted. "But not of you. I'm afraid of what this means for us, for any future we might have. I'm afraid of what happens if your enemies find out you love me. I'm afraid I'll wake up tomorrow and regret this decision. And yet you're still here. And yet I'm still here." She traced the line of his jaw, this beautiful, dangerous man who'd chosen her out of everyone in the world. "I spent so long being afraid of the wrong things, Seo. I was afraid of being alone, so I stayed with a man who treated me like an accessory. I was afraid of failure, so I gave up everything to support his dreams instead of my own. I was afraid of being hurt, so I built walls. So high nobody could climb them." "What are you afraid of now?" he asked quietly. She smiled against his shoulder. "Now? I'm afraid of playing it safe. I'm afraid of walking away from something real just because it's complicated and dangerous and probably going to end in disaster. I've been safe my whole life, Seo, and it got me exactly nowhere. So you're choosing danger instead." "I'm choosing you," she corrected. "The danger is just part of the package." He pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I will protect you with everything I have, Stephanie. I will keep you safe even if it costs me my empire." That's a very romantic threat. It's not a threat. It's a promise. His arms tightened around her. "Sleep now. Tomorrow, the real negotiations begin." She was already drifting off when she murmured, "What negotiations?" "Your position in my organization. If you're going to be my wife in truth, not just on paper, then you need official standing. You need to be protected not just by me, but by the structure itself." That woke her up a little. "What kind of position?" "We'll discuss it tomorrow," he said firmly. "Right now, I just want to hold my wife and pretend the rest of the world doesn't exist." Stephanie let him have that. Let them both have it, this one perfect night where nothing mattered except the two of them and the choice they'd made to be honest, to be real, to be together despite every logical reason they shouldn't be. Tomorrow would bring complications. Tomorrow she'd have to figure out what it meant to be the wife of a mafia boss, what role she could possibly play in an organization built on violence and loyalty. Tomorrow, her life would change irrevocably. But tonight, she was just a woman in her husband's arms, finally feeling safe enough to sleep without nightmares for the first time in months. The rose on her breakfast tray had been white, pure, innocent, a promise of new beginnings. She wondered what color he'd choose tomorrow. Want to see how Stephanie navigates her new role in the underworld? Comment what you think her position should be. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and trust me, you won't want to miss what happens when her ex finds out who she married. The conference room fell silent the moment Stephanie walked in. 8 men in expensive suits turned to stare at her, their expressions ranging from shock to barely concealed contempt. She recognized the look, the same one she'd seen on countless faces throughout her career. A woman. A black woman. An American woman who didn't belong in their world of old money and older traditions. But this time, she had something they didn't. She had Kim Seo's ring on her finger and his organization at her back. "Gentlemen," Kim Seo said from the head of the table, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "This is my wife, Stephanie Kim. She will be joining our leadership council effective immediately." The oldest man at the table, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, leaned back in his chair. "With all due respect, Seoya, your personal life is your business. But bringing an outsider into our operations is not up for discussion, Director Choi." Kim Seo's tone didn't change, but the temperature in the room dropped several degrees. "Stephanie has my complete trust and confidence. She will oversee the restructuring of our legitimate business operations and serve as my advisor on international expansion. Anyone who has a problem with this arrangement is welcome to tender their resignation." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Stephanie took the empty seat beside Kim Seo, her hands steady despite her racing heart. This was the negotiation he'd mentioned last night, her position, her power, her place in a world that would eat her alive if she showed even a moment of weakness. She'd spent the morning preparing for this, not by learning about money laundering or protection rackets, but by doing what she did best, analyzing financial structures, identifying inefficiencies, understanding how legitimate businesses could be optimized for maximum profit with minimum legal exposure. Kim Seo had given her access to everything. Every ledger, every shell company, every investment portfolio that made up the legal side of his empire. And what she'd found had been fascinating. "Director Choi raises a valid concern," she said, her voice clear and professional. "I am an outsider. I don't understand your traditions, your history, or the delicate balance of power that keeps this organization functioning. But that's exactly why I'm valuable." Several men exchanged glances. One of them, younger, maybe early 40s, leaned forward with interest. "How so, Mrs. Kim?" "Because I see inefficiencies you've stopped noticing. Your real estate holdings are structured in a way that made sense 15 years ago, but now expose you to unnecessary tax liability. Your technology investments are concentrated in sectors that are about to face regulatory scrutiny. And your international partnerships are managed through intermediaries who are taking 30% off the top for services you could handle in-house with the right team." She pulled out her tablet and projected her analysis onto the screen. Numbers, charts, projections, the language she spoke fluently, the battlefield where she'd won respect in boardrooms from Chicago to Singapore. "In the last quarter alone, you've lost approximately 200 million won to inefficient structuring. Over a year, that's nearly $1 billion that could be reinvested, distributed to leadership, or used to expand operations." She met Director Choi's eyes directly. "I'm not here to interfere with your business. I'm here to make sure the legitimate side of this organization is so profitable and so clean that it becomes your primary source of power. Legal money, legal influence, legal protection." The room was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet now. Thoughtful instead of hostile. "You've been busy," the younger man said with a slight smile. "I'm Director Park, Head of Technology Investments. I'd very much like to hear more about this regulatory scrutiny you mentioned. The Korean government is preparing new cryptocurrency regulations that will be announced next month," Stephanie said. "I have contacts in the Ministry of Economy and Finance who've confirmed the timeline. Your current holdings will lose approximately 40% of their value when those regulations hit. But if we divest now and reinvest in the sectors that will benefit from the new framework, you'll double your returns within 6 months." Director Park's smile widened. "I'm convinced. Welcome to the council, Mrs. Kim." One by one, the other directors nodded their acceptance. Even Director Choi, though he looked like it pained him. Kim Seo's hand found hers under the table, his fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture of support that nobody else could see. "Then we're in agreement. Stephanie will have full access to all legitimate business operations and the authority to implement changes as she sees fit. Director Park, you'll work with her on the technology portfolio restructuring. Director Choi, I expect you to facilitate her access to your real estate contacts." "Of course," Director Choi said tightly. The meeting continued for another hour, discussing territories and payments and problems that Stephanie didn't fully understand yet. But she listened, she learned, and she started to see the patterns, how money flowed from illegal operations into legal businesses, how legitimate profits were used to expand influence. how the entire structure was designed to protect Kim Seo and his people from prosecution. It was brilliant and terrifying in equal measure. When the meeting finally ended, the directors filed out with respectful bows to Kim Seo and cautious nods to Stephanie. She'd passed the first test, but she knew the real challenges were just beginning. "You were magnificent," Kim Seo said once they were alone, pulling her into his arms. "Did you see Choi's face when you called out the tax liability? I thought he was going to have a stroke." "He hates me," Stephanie said against his chest, letting herself relax for just a moment. "He hates change. Give him 3 months to see your results and he'll be your strongest supporter." Kim Seo tilted her chin up to look at him. "I'm proud of you, Stephanie. You walked into a room full of men who've built empires on fear and violence, and you earned their respect with numbers and logic. That's the only language I know how to speak. It's enough." He kissed her softly. More than enough. A knock on the conference room door interrupted them. One of Kim Seo's security team, a man named June who Stephanie had learned was actually his head of intelligence, entered with a tablet. "Sir, we have a situation." Kim Seo's expression shifted instantly from loving husband to dangerous boss. "What kind of situation?" "Lee Jae-sung has been making noise. He showed up at the Shilla Hotel last night claiming he needed to speak with Mrs. Kim urgently. When security denied him access, he made a scene. Started telling anyone who would listen that his ex-girlfriend was being held against her will by a dangerous man." Ice flooded Stephanie's veins. "He's trying to paint Seo as abusive. He's trying to create leverage," Kim Seo corrected, his voice cold. "If he can generate enough public concern, enough questions about your well-being, he thinks I'll be forced to let him see you. And once he has access, he'll try to manipulate you into helping him rebuild what I destroyed." "That's not going to work," Stephanie said firmly. "I want nothing to do with him." "I know. But we need to handle this carefully." Kim Seo looked at June. "What's the exposure?" "Limited so far. Hotel security contained him before he could cause real damage, and our people have been monitoring his movements. But he's desperate, sir. His fiancé's father officially pulled all investment yesterday. The wedding is cancelled. He's lost everything and he's blaming you." "Good," Kim Seo said without emotion. "Let him blame me. What I want to know is whether he's stupid enough to escalate. Our assessment is yes. He's been drinking heavily, making calls to anyone who might give him capital, and he's fixated on Mrs. Kim. He believes reconciling with her is his path back to stability." Stephanie felt sick. Even now, even after everything, Jae-sung saw her as a tool. A means to an end. She'd never been a person to him, just a resource to be exploited. "I want eyes on him 24/7, Kim Seo ordered. And I want to know the moment he tries to make contact with Stephanie through any channel. Phone, email, social media, mutual acquaintances, everything. Already being monitored, sir." "Good." Dismissed. June left, and Stephanie sank into one of the conference room chairs. "This is my fault. If I hadn't been so stupid, if I hadn't wasted 3 years on him." "Stop." Kim Seo knelt in front of her, taking her hands. "None of this is your fault. You love someone who didn't deserve it. That's not stupidity, Stephanie. That's the risk we all take when we open our hearts. You wouldn't make that mistake." "I made a bigger one," he said quietly. "I fell in love with my contract wife and put her directly in the crosshairs of everyone who wants to hurt me. At least your mistake was made in good faith. Mine was selfish from the start." She touched his face, this complicated man who could order violence one moment and kneel before her the next. "It wasn't selfish. You saved me." "I claimed you," he corrected. "There's a difference. Maybe I wanted to be claimed." Something heated in his eyes. "Careful, Mrs. Kim. We're still in my office building. And I have a reputation for professionalism to maintain." "Since when do you care about reputation?" "Since my wife started looking at me like she wants me to forget about professionalism entirely." He stood, pulling her up with him. "Come on. I'm taking you home before I do something that will scandalize my entire security team." They took his private elevator down to the parking garage, where his driver was waiting with the car. But as they approached, June appeared again, his expression grim. "Sir, we have a problem." "What now?" Kim Seo's patience was clearly wearing thin. "Lee Jae-sung is outside the building. He somehow found out Mrs. Kim was here, and he's demanding to speak with her. He's brought reporters. Stephanie's heart sank. He's trying to force a confrontation in public. Smart, Kim Seo admitted grudgingly. If I have my security remove him forcibly with cameras watching, it plays into his narrative that I'm controlling you. If I let him speak to you, he'll try to manipulate the situation on camera. So what do we do? Kim Seo considered for a moment, then smiled, a cold, calculating expression that reminded Stephanie exactly who she'd married. We give him what he wants. But on our terms. 5 minutes later, Stephanie walked out of the building on Kim Seo's arm, straight into a wall of camera flashes and shouted questions. Jae-sung was standing at the edge of the crowd, looking simultaneously triumphant and desperate. He'd lost weight, she noticed distantly. His suit was expensive but rumpled, his eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep or too much alcohol or both. He looked like a stranger. "Stephanie," he called out, pushing through the reporters. "Stephanie, please, I need to talk to you." "Mr. Lee," Kim Seo's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "You're causing a disturbance at my place of business. I suggest you leave before I have security remove you." "I'm not talking to you," Jae-sung spat. "I'm talking to Stephanie. My Stephanie, who you manipulated into some fake marriage." "I'm not your anything," Stephanie said, her voice steady and clear. "I haven't been for months, Jae-sung. Not since you traded me for an investment deal and laughed in my face when I confronted you about it." The cameras swung toward her. This was it, her chance to reclaim her narrative, to take back the power Jae-sung had stolen when he humiliated her at that hotel. "You're confused," Jae-sung said, his tone patronizing in a way that made her blood boil. "He's got you confused. Stephanie, I made a mistake, okay? I admit it. But we can fix this. We can go back to how things were." "How things were?" She stepped away from Kim Seo, facing Jae-sung directly. "You mean when I worked 60-hour weeks to support your startup while you partied with investors? When I paid our rent and bought your groceries and believed your promises that we were partners? When you told me you loved me while planning your engagement to another woman behind my back? That was business. Then our relationship is concluded," she said coldly. "Because I don't do business with people who lie to me. I don't do business with people who use me. And I certainly don't do business with people who show up at my husband's office building with reporters to play victim when the consequences of their own actions finally catch up with them." Jae-sung's face was red now, angry and humiliated. "You think you're better than me now? You think marrying some rich guy makes you special? He doesn't love you, Stephanie. He's using you just like I did, except he's better at hiding it." Kim Seo moved so fast Stephanie almost missed it. One moment he was standing behind her, the next he was inches from Jae-sung's face, his voice low and deadly. "You will not speak about my wife that way. You will not contact her, you will not approach her, and you will not spread lies about our marriage. This is your only warning, Mr. Lee. Walk away now, or I will make you disappear so completely that even your mother won't remember your name." It wasn't a threat. It was a promise, delivered with the absolute certainty of a man who had the power to make it happen. Jae-sung stumbled backward, fear finally breaking through his desperation. "You can't, this is Seoul, not some gangster movie." "Can't I?" Kim Seo smiled, and it was the most terrifying thing Stephanie had ever seen. "Test me and find out." Security appeared then, professional and efficient, escorting Jae-sung away from the building while reporters shouted questions. Kim Seo ignored them all, turning back to Stephanie with concern replacing the cold fury. "Are you all right?" She was shaking, she realized. Not from fear, but from adrenaline and anger and the sheer satisfaction of finally telling Jae-sung exactly what she thought of him. "I'm perfect," she said, and meant it. Kim Seo guided her to the car, shielding her from cameras with his body until they were safely inside. The driver pulled away from the chaos, heading toward home while Stephanie tried to process what had just happened. "That was reckless," she said finally. "You threatened him in front of witnesses." "I promised him consequences," Kim Seo corrected. "There's a difference. Besides, those reporters work for media outlets that I either own or have significant influence over. The footage they air will be carefully edited to show exactly what we want them to show. Which is A harassing ex-boyfriend being removed from private property after making a scene. A devoted husband protecting his wife. A strong woman standing up for herself. He took her hand. You were incredible, by the way. The way you faced him without flinching, Stephanie, I've seen grown men crumble under less pressure than what you just handled. I spent 3 years letting him make me feel small, she said quietly. I'm done being small. Good. Kim Seo pressed a kiss to her knuckles. Because the woman I married is anything but small. She's brilliant and fierce and exactly the kind of queen my empire needs. They drove the rest of the way in comfortable silence, Stephanie's head resting on Kim Seo's shoulder while Seoul passed by outside the window. The city that had broken her was starting to feel less like a prison and more like a kingdom, one where she was finally learning the rules of power. When they arrived home, Mrs. Han informed them that dinner would be ready in an hour. Kim Seo disappeared into his office to handle the fallout from the confrontation, leaving Stephanie alone with her thoughts. She found herself drawn back to his office, to the photo she'd looked at yesterday. The young Kim Seo with his parents, frozen in a moment before tragedy reshaped his entire life. They died in a car accident. Kim Seo's voice came from behind her. She hadn't heard him follow. Or at least, that's what the official report said. Stephanie turned to face him. You don't believe it was an accident? I know it wasn't. He crossed to stand beside her, looking down at the photo with an expression she couldn't quite read. My father ran the organization before me. He was trying to legitimize parts of it, to build legal businesses that could eventually replace the illegal operations. Some of our allies saw that as weakness. As betrayal of what the organization stood for. They killed him. They killed both my parents and made it look like an accident. I was 18, grieving, and absolutely unprepared to take over. But I didn't have a choice. His jaw tightened. So I learned. I became harder than my father ever was. I eliminated everyone involved in the plot, not just the ones who ordered it, but everyone who knew and said nothing. And I made it clear that anyone who challenged me would face the same fate. You were protecting yourself, Stephanie said softly. I was becoming a monster. He looked at her then, vulnerability clear in his eyes. I've done terrible things, Stephanie. Things I can't take back. Things I barely regret because they were necessary to survive. The organization I run now is stronger than it's ever been, more profitable, more feared. But it's also everything my father tried to move away from. So change it, she said simply. You have the power. Use it. It's not that simple. Isn't it? She took his hands, making him look at her. You told me yesterday that you'd burn your empire down for me. That you'd choose love over power. But what if you don't have to choose? What if we can build something better together? Something that honors what your father tried to do, while keeping you safe. You're talking about legitimization. I'm talking about evolution. Her mind was already racing, seeing possibilities. The legal businesses I analyzed today, they're profitable, CO. Really profitable. With proper restructuring and expansion, they could generate more revenue than your illegal operations within 3 years. And legal money means legal power, political influence, corporate respect, protection from prosecution. And what about the people who depend on the illegal operations? The dealers, the enforcers, the whole network that exists because legitimate businesses won't hire them. We retrain them. We give them positions in security, in logistics, in whatever legal framework we build. The ones who can't or won't adapt, we pension them out with enough money to disappear quietly. She could see it now, the whole plan unfolding. It won't be easy, and it won't be fast. But in 5 years, we could transform your organization into something your father would be proud of. Kim Seo stared at her like she'd just offered him the moon. You're serious? Completely. I didn't marry a criminal, Seo. I married a king. And kings don't just rule, they build legacies. Let's build one that lasts longer than we do. He kissed her then, deep and claiming, backing her against the desk until she was sitting on the edge with him between her legs. Have I mentioned that you're the most extraordinary woman I've ever met? Once or twice, she managed between kisses. But I don't mind hearing it again. Extraordinary, he murmured against her throat. Brilliant. Mine. Yours, she agreed, giving herself over to the heat building between them. They made love on his desk, desperate and urgent, christening the space where he conducted his business with a different kind of negotiation entirely. And when they were both breathless and satisfied, when Stephanie was wrapped in Kim Seo's arms with her head on his chest, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Not the desperate, fragile hope she'd clung to with Jae-sung, always waiting for the other shoe to drop. This was something stronger. Something built on truth and choice, and the absolute certainty that the man holding her would move heaven and earth to keep her safe. We should probably head to dinner, Kim Seo said eventually. Mrs. Han will be scandalized if we're late. Mrs. Han knows exactly what we're doing, Stephanie countered. She's known about your feelings since before I did. True. He helped her stand, both of them straightening clothes and trying to look presentable. But she still expects us to maintain certain standards of decorum. They made it to the dining room with 5 minutes to spare. Mrs. Han served them with knowing eyes and a small smile, setting out dishes that smelled incredible. Mrs. Han, Stephanie said impulsively, how many people work in this house? Including security and ground staff? About 30, Mrs. Kim. And they all know about the organization? About what Seo really does? Yes, ma'am. Loyalty is a requirement of employment here. Everyone who works in this house has been vetted extensively and has proven their discretion. Stephanie looked at Kim Seo. How many of them came from the illegal side of operations? About half, he admitted. Why? Because they're proof that your people can adapt. If they can transition from whatever they were doing before to legitimate household positions, they can transition to corporate roles or security positions or whatever else we need. She turned back to Mrs. Han. Would you be willing to help me with something? I'm going to need insights into the organization's culture, into what motivates the people who work for Seo. I can't restructure effectively without understanding the human element. Mrs. Han looked surprised, then pleased. I would be honored, Mrs. Kim. Good. Let's schedule time this week to talk. Dinner passed pleasantly after that, with Kim Seo watching Stephanie like she might disappear if he looked away. When they finally retired to his bedroom, their bedroom now, a shift that felt both natural and momentous, he pulled her close and whispered against her hair. When I married you, I thought I was giving you protection. I thought I was the one saving you. You were, Stephanie said. No, he tightened his arms around her. You're saving me, Stephanie. From becoming my worst self. From losing sight of anything beyond power and control. You're giving me a reason to be better, to build something that matters. She turned in his arms to face him. We're saving each other, then. How's that for a marriage contract? Perfect, he said, and kissed her with a tenderness that made her heart ache. Absolutely perfect. Outside, Seoul glittered in the darkness, a city of millions where fortunes were made and lost every day, where power shifted like sand and only the strong survived. Somewhere out there, Jae-sung was probably drinking away his failures and cursing the woman who'd escaped his control. Somewhere out there. Rivals were plotting against Kim Seo's empire, looking for weaknesses to exploit. But here, in this bedroom high above the city, Stephanie felt safe. She felt cherished. She felt like maybe, just maybe, she'd finally found where she belonged. In the arms of a dangerous man who loved her enough to change his world. In a life she hadn't chosen but was learning to claim as her own. In a future that scared her and excited her in equal measure. She fell asleep with Kim Seo's heartbeat steady beneath her ear, and for the first time since arriving in Korea, she dreamed of tomorrow instead of yesterday. The black SUV came out of nowhere. Stephanie was leaving a coffee shop in Gangnam, her hands full of documents for the corporate restructuring meeting scheduled for that afternoon, when tires squealed against pavement and the world exploded into chaos. Strong hands grabbed her from behind, a cloth pressed against her mouth and nose, and the sharp chemical smell of chloroform filled her lungs. She tried to scream, tried to fight, but her body was already going limp. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was her security detail, the 2 men Kim Seo had assigned to shadow her everywhere, lying motionless on the ground in pools of spreading blood. Then nothing. When consciousness returned, it came in fragments. Cold concrete beneath her cheek. The metallic taste of blood in her mouth. Voices speaking in rapid Korean somewhere above her, too fast for her limited language skills to follow. And pain. Her wrists were bound behind her back with zip ties that cut into her skin, her ankles similarly restrained. Every breath sent sharp spikes of agony through her ribs where someone had kicked her. Stephanie forced her eyes open, fighting against the nausea that threatened to overwhelm her. She was in a warehouse, abandoned from the look of it, with broken windows high above letting in pale afternoon light. Crates were stacked against the walls, and the floor was stained with substances she didn't want to identify. 3 men stood nearby, talking in low voices. One of them noticed her stirring and barked something to his companions. They turned to look at her, and Stephanie's blood ran cold. These weren't common criminals. They moved with military precision, wore expensive clothes beneath their tactical gear, and carried themselves with the authority of men who were very good at violence. The oldest of them, maybe 50, with a scar running down his left cheek, crouched in front of her. He spoke in accented English. "Mrs. Kim, how nice of you to join us. I apologize for the rough handling, but we needed to move quickly before your husband's people could interfere. Who are you?" Stephanie's voice came out rough, her throat raw from the chloroform. "My name is Kang Minho. I represent certain interests that have been very unhappy with your husband's recent business decisions." He pulled out a phone, setting it on the floor in front of her. "You're going to call Kim Seo and deliver a message for me. Go to hell." Kang's expression didn't change, but one of his men stepped forward and backhanded her across the face. Pain exploded through her cheek and she tasted fresh blood. "Let's try this again," Kang said pleasantly. "You're going to call your husband and tell him that if he wants to see you alive, he needs to make some concessions. He's been disrupting traditional power structures, making alliances with people who should be our enemies, and generally behaving like he doesn't need to respect the old ways. This stops now, or you pay the price for his arrogance." Stephanie's mind was racing despite the pain and fear. This was exactly what Kim Seo had warned her about, rivals using her as leverage, turning their love into a weapon against him. She could call him, could beg him to give these men whatever they wanted to keep her safe. But that would undo everything. All his work, all his power. All the protection he'd built for both of them would crumble the moment he showed weakness. "No," she said. Kang sighed. "I was afraid you'd say that. Americans are so unnecessarily stubborn." He nodded to one of his men. "Persuade her." The next few minutes were a blur of pain. They didn't ask questions, didn't demand answers, just delivered systematic violence designed to break her will without killing her. By the time they stopped, Stephanie was sobbing, her body a map of bruises and cuts, her resistance crumbling under the weight of sheer survival instinct. "Ready to make that call now?" Kang asked, his tone almost kind. She wanted to say no again. Wanted to be strong, to protect Kim Seo even if it cost her everything. But her body was screaming and her mind was fracturing, and all she could think was that she didn't want to die in this warehouse, alone and broken, without ever seeing her husband's face again. "Yes," she whispered. "I'll call him." Kang smiled and handed her the phone. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold it, but she managed to pull up Kim Seo's contact and press dial. He answered on the first ring. "Stephanie." His voice was tight, controlled, but she could hear the fear beneath it. "Where are you? Are you hurt?" "June found your security team." "I'm alive," she interrupted, the words tumbling out. "Seo, I'm alive, but they're going to," she broke off, sobbing, unable to continue. Kang took the phone from her hands. "Kim Seo. I believe you, and I need to have a conversation about the future of Seoul's business landscape. Your wife is currently enjoying my hospitality in a location you'll never find without my cooperation. If you want her returned in one piece, you'll meet my terms." Stephanie couldn't hear Kim Seo's response, but she saw Kang's expression harden. "I don't think you understand your position, Kim. I have something you value more than your empire. More than your life. I suggest you adjust your tone accordingly." A pause. Then Kang's smile returned. "That's better. Here are my terms. You will withdraw from the Busan territory negotiations. You will cease your alliance with the Choi organization. You will publicly acknowledge my authority in matters of—" He stopped abruptly, his expression shifting to something like confusion. "What do you mean, it's already done?" Stephanie's heart lurched. What was Kim Seo doing? "You're bluffing," Kong said, but there was uncertainty in his voice now. "You couldn't possibly—" He pulled a second phone from his pocket, checking something on the screen. His face went pale. "How did you—" The warehouse doors exploded inward. Stephanie screamed as smoke grenades detonated, as gunfire erupted, as Kang's men scrambled for weapons while shadows poured through the breach. She couldn't see anything through the smoke and chaos, couldn't tell who was winning or losing, could only press herself against the concrete and pray she didn't catch a stray bullet. Then someone was cutting her restraints, gentle hands checking her injuries, and Kim Seo's voice was in her ear, rough with emotion. "I've got you. I've got you, sweetheart. You're safe now." She grabbed onto him like he was the only solid thing in a tilting world. "Seo, how did you find me?" "Later." He scooped her into his arms, moving with lethal efficiency through the smoke. "June, status?" "Warehouse secured." June's voice came from somewhere to their left. "3 hostiles down, 2 in custody. Kang Min-ho is secured and awaiting your orders." "Good. Bring him to the car. I want him to watch what happens when someone touches my wife." They emerged from the warehouse into blinding sunlight. Kim Seo's car was waiting, surrounded by at least a dozen armed men who looked more like military operatives than criminals. He placed Stephanie carefully in the back seat, his hands shaking as he examined her injuries. "Who did this to you?" His voice was deadly calm, which somehow made it more terrifying. "Which one of them hit you?" "Seo. It doesn't matter. It matters to me." He brushed his fingers over the bruise forming on her cheek with a gentleness that contradicted the murder in his eyes. "Tell me which one, Stephanie." "The tall one, with the tattoo on his neck." She was shaking now, shock setting in. "But Seo, how did you find me so fast?" "They took my phone, You're wearing my wedding ring," he said simply. "Did you really think I wouldn't put a tracker in it?" Despite everything, she almost laughed. Of course he'd put a tracker in her ring. Of course her overprotective Mafia boss husband would take precautions she'd never thought of. June appeared, dragging a bound and bloodied Kang Min-ho behind him. The older man's earlier confidence was gone, replaced by the expression of a man who just realized he'd made a fatal miscalculation. Kim Seo stepped out of the car, leaving Stephanie in the relative safety of the back seat. She watched through the window as he approached Kong with the measured steps of a predator. "You made 3 mistakes today," Kim Seo said, his voice carrying clearly in the sudden quiet. "First, you assumed I valued my empire more than my wife. Second, you assumed I wouldn't burn this entire city to the ground to get her back. Third, and most fatal, you hurt her." "Kim, please. I was just following orders. The old families wanted to send a message. Then I'll send one back." Kim Seo looked at June, the tall one with the neck tattoo. "Bring him here." One of the captured men was dragged forward, forced to his knees beside Kong. He was young, maybe late 20s, and clearly terrified. "This man struck my wife," Kim Seo said, speaking to his assembled men now. "He put his hands on her. He made her bleed. Does anyone here believe such an offense should go unpunished?" Silence. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Kim Seo drew a gun from inside his jacket, the same gun Stephanie had seen him press against Mr. Park's temple days ago, and without hesitation, without ceremony, he shot the man through the head. The sound echoed across the industrial district like thunder. Stephanie flinched, bile rising in her throat. She'd known Kim Seo was capable of violence, had accepted it intellectually. But watching him kill someone, watching him execute a man for the crime of following orders. "As for you," Kim Seo said, turning back to Kong, "you're going to carry a message to whoever sent you. Tell them that Stephanie Kim is under my absolute protection. Tell them that anyone who threatens her, who so much as looks at her wrong, will face the same fate as your associate here. Tell them that I am done playing political games with people who mistake my restraint for weakness." He leaned down until he was eye level with Kang. "And tell them that the next person who tries this won't get a quick death." I'll make it last days. Weeks if I'm feeling creative. Do you understand me? Kang nodded frantically, tears streaming down his face. Good. June, let him go. I want him to deliver my message personally. Sir, are you sure? I'm sure. Cut him loose and give him a car. I want everyone in Seoul to hear what happens when you touch what's mine. June obeyed, though he looked skeptical. Within minutes, Kang was speeding away in a beat-up sedan, leaving behind his dead associate and his shattered organization. Kim Seo returned to the car, sliding into the back seat beside Stephanie. His hands were steady as he reached for her, but she saw the tremor in his jaw, the way his eyes couldn't quite meet hers. Don't look at me like that, he said quietly. Like what? Like you're afraid of me. His voice cracked on the last word. Stephanie, I know what you just saw. I know what it makes me. But he hurt you. He made you cry. And I will not let that go unpunished. She was crying now, overwhelmed by shock and pain and the surreal horror of watching her husband commit murder like it was nothing. You killed him. Yes. Without hesitation. Without even asking if I wanted you to. Would you have wanted me to show him mercy? Kim Seo turned to face her fully, his expression raw. After what he did to you? After he put his hands on you and made you bleed? Should I have let him walk away unpunished, knowing he'd tell his friends that hurting you carries no consequences? I don't know. The words burst out of her. I don't know what I wanted, Seo. I'm not built for this. I'm not built for a world where people die because they followed orders from the wrong boss. I'm not built to be married to someone who can execute a man and then hold me like nothing happened. Then leave. The words were knife-sharp, cutting through her panic. Leave me, Stephanie. Take your settlement, go back to America, and forget you ever knew me. Forget that for 3 months you were married to a monster who loves you too much to let anyone hurt you. That's not fair. None of this is fair. He was shouting now, his control finally shattering. You think I wanted this? You think I wanted to fall in love with someone who makes me weak, who gives my enemies a target, who forces me to choose between protecting you and maintaining the restraint that keeps this city from descending into all-out war. I killed that man because letting him live would be an invitation for every ambitious criminal in Seoul to try the same thing. I killed him because mercy would cost you your life. The car was silent except for their ragged breathing. Stephanie looked at her husband, this complicated, dangerous, devoted man who just murdered someone to protect her honor, and realized she had a choice to make. She could do what he suggested, could take the easy path and disappear back into her old life, where violence was something that happened on TV instead of in front of her. Or she could accept who Kim Seo really was. Accept the blood on his hands and the empire built on fear and the absolute certainty that he would kill anyone who threatened her without a moment's hesitation. She could accept that she'd married a monster who loved her. Take me home, she said finally. Kim Seo looked at her warily. Stephanie, take me home, clean me up, and hold me while I process this. Then tomorrow, we're going to have a very long conversation about boundaries and acceptable levels of violence, and how we navigate this marriage when our definitions of justice are very different. She touched his face, forcing him to look at her. But right now, I just need you to take me home and make me feel safe. Can you do that? Something broke in his expression, relief and gratitude and love so intense it hurt to witness. Yes, I can do that. The drive back to the mansion was silent. Kim Seo held her the entire way, his arms gentle despite the violence they'd just committed, his face buried in her hair like he was afraid she'd disappear if he let go. Mrs. Han was waiting when they arrived, her expression shifting to horror when she saw Stephanie's condition. Mrs. Kim, oh my God. I'm okay, Stephanie managed. Just bruised. Nothing broken. I've called Dr. Park, June said, appearing behind them. He'll be here within the hour to examine Mrs. Kim properly. Sir, we should discuss security protocols. Later, Kim Seo said shortly. Right now, I'm taking care of my wife. Everything else can wait. He carried Stephanie upstairs to their bedroom, setting her down on the bed with exquisite care. Then he disappeared into the bathroom, and she heard water running. When he returned, he helped her undress with clinical efficiency, his eyes cataloging every bruise and cut with an expression that promised future violence. "I'm going to kill all of them," he said conversationally. "Not today, not tomorrow. But everyone involved in this, everyone who knew it was happening and didn't stop it, I'm going to dismantle their organizations piece by piece until there's nothing left but rubble and regret. Seo, I know you don't approve. I know you think there should be another way. But Stephanie, these people only understand one language, and that language is written in blood." He guided her toward the bathroom. "I've already let them know that touching you means death. Now I need to show them what that death looks like." The bathroom was filled with steam, the massive tub already half full of hot water. Kim Seo helped her in, then surprised her by stripping down and climbing in behind her, positioning her between his legs so her back rested against his chest. "I thought you'd be running off to plan revenge," she said quietly. "Revenge can wait. You can't." His arms came around her, holding her steady as she finally let herself cry, great, racking sobs that shook her entire body. He held her through it all, whispering reassurances in Korean that she didn't understand, but somehow made her feel safer anyway. His hands were gentle as he washed the blood from her skin, as he carefully cleaned the cuts that would scar, as he erased every physical trace of her kidnapping except the bruises that would take weeks to fade. "I was so scared," she admitted when she could finally speak again. "Not just of them, but of you finding me too late. Of dying in that warehouse without ever seeing you again. You'll never have to be that scared again," he promised. "I'm doubling your security. Triple if I have to. You won't be able to sneeze without 5 armed guards blessing you." Despite everything, she laughed. "That seems excessive." "Nothing is excessive when it comes to your safety." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "I failed you today, Stephanie. I promised to protect you, and I let them take you from right under my nose. You saved me. After they hurt you. After they terrorized you. After they made you call me and beg for your life." His voice was raw with self-recrimination. "That's not protection. That's reactive damage control." Stephanie turned in his arms until she was facing him, water sloshing dangerously close to the tub's edge. "Listen to me. What happened today wasn't your fault. Those men made a choice to come after me. They made a choice to use me as a weapon against you. That's on them, not on you. If you weren't my wife. If I weren't your wife, I'd still be broken and alone in some guest house, trying to scrape together enough money for a plane ticket home. If I weren't your wife, Jae-sung would still be harassing me with no consequences. If I weren't your wife, I wouldn't know what it feels like to be loved by someone who would burn the world down to keep me safe." She touched his face, feeling the muscles jump beneath her fingers. "Yes, being married to you is dangerous. Yes, it's complicated and terrifying and probably going to get me killed someday. But it's also the best thing that ever happened to me. You can't mean that. Not after today. Especially after today." She kissed him softly. "Because today proved that when you say you'll protect me, you mean it. When you say you love me, you mean it. When you promise that no one will hurt me without consequences, you deliver on that promise even if it means committing murder in broad daylight. That doesn't scare you?" "It terrifies me," she admitted. "But not as much as the thought of losing you scares me. Not as much as going back to a life where nobody cares enough to be terrifying on my behalf." Kim Seo kissed her then, deep and desperate, his hands tangling in her wet hair. They made love in the cooling bathwater, gentle and slow, reaffirming life in the way humans had since the beginning of time. And when they finally climbed out and dried off, when Kim Seo insisted on personally applying ointment to every cut and bruise, Stephanie felt something settle in her chest. Acceptance, maybe. Or surrender. Or just the simple recognition that she'd made her choice, and there was no going back now. Dr. Park arrived an hour later, a distinguished man in his 60s who examined Stephanie with professional detachment while Kim Seo hovered like an anxious shadow. The diagnosis was mostly good bruised ribs, multiple contusions, minor lacerations that would heal cleanly. Nothing broken, nothing permanent except the psychological trauma that would take time to process. "She's very lucky," Dr. Park said as he packed up his medical bag. "A few inches different on some of those strikes and we'd be looking at internal bleeding or worse. They'll never get the chance to try again," Kim Seo said flatly. Dr. Park just nodded, clearly accustomed to his employer's particular brand of protective violence. I'll leave pain medication and detailed care instructions with Mrs. Han. Mrs. Kim should rest for the next few days, no strenuous activity, plenty of fluids, and someone should monitor her for signs of concussion. I'll be monitoring her personally, Kim Seo assured him. After the doctor left, Kim Seo helped Stephanie into bed and climbed in beside her, pulling her carefully against his chest. Sleep, he ordered. I'll be right here. You're not going to run off and murder people while I'm unconscious? The murders can wait until you're strong enough to argue with me about them. He kissed her forehead. Besides, I've already set things in motion. By this time tomorrow, Kang's organization will be in ruins and everyone who knew about the kidnapping will be dead or wishing they were. I don't need to personally oversee every execution. That's oddly comforting and deeply disturbing at the same time. Welcome to being married to me. There was dark humor in his voice. It only gets more complicated from here. Stephanie was drifting off when she remembered something. Seo? Earlier on the phone, Kong said something about you already giving him what he wanted. What did that mean? Kim Seo was quiet for a long moment. I told him I'd give him everything he asked for. The territories, the alliances, all of it. I would have handed him my entire empire if that's what it took to get you back safely. But you didn't have to, because I found you first. But make no mistake, Stephanie, if it had come down to choosing between my power and your life, I wouldn't have hesitated. The empire means nothing without you. His arms tightened around her. That's what Kong didn't understand. That's what none of them understand. They think I build all this because I'm hungry for power, because I need to be feared and respected. But the truth is, I only maintain it now because it's the best way to keep you safe. If I could protect you some other way, I'd walk away from all of it tomorrow. I wouldn't ask you to do that. I know. That's one of the many reasons I love you. He pressed his lips to her hair. Now sleep. Tomorrow we'll start planning how to make sure this never happens again. Stephanie closed her eyes, letting exhaustion pull her under. Her last conscious thought was that she should probably be more disturbed by how quickly she'd accepted having a husband who casually discussed murder like other men discussed golf. But she was too tired to analyze it right now. Too bruised, too overwhelmed, too grateful to be alive and safe in Kim Seo's arms. Tomorrow she'd worry about morality and consequences and what kind of person she was becoming. Tomorrow she'd have that long conversation about boundaries and acceptable violence. Tonight, she just let herself be held by the monster who loved her and pretended that was enough. Things just got real. Stephanie's been kidnapped. Kim Seo just showed exactly how far he'll go to protect her, and the gloves are officially off. What do you think happens next? Will Stephanie embrace her role as a mafia queen, or will this be too much for her to handle? Drop your predictions in the comments and smash that subscribe button. Part 2 is coming, and trust me, the revenge arc is going to be insane. If you're loving this story, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs a dangerous romance in their life.